Every pilot thinks of buying an aeroplane, and every pilot thinks of maybe selling it and upgrading it at some point. We took advantage of Philippe Polman, who came to visit Flyer at Wadswick, to get some hints and tips on buying or selling an aeroplane. Philippe Polman, Echelon Air. We're going to talk about a few of the tips for buying an aircraft, selling an aircraft, and talk about some of the things that can go wrong. So tell us, what's the kind of one, if you had to distill, if you had someone's attention for like 45 seconds, what's the one tip you would give them if they're about to embark on that process?
So the single biggest thing when you're buying your own airplane is really knowing what it is that you want out of your airplane, right? So it's this first phase of any acquisition, which is defining the mission, right? I know it's a catchphrase, everybody's probably heard it a billion times, but too often we don't go deep enough, right? It's enough to say, hey, I want to fly to my second home in the south of France and I need an airplane that's an IFR tour to do that. But defining that in more detail is critical, right? Because there's so many IFR tours, from an RV through to a Phenom 300E, all of which do exactly that mission and do them in completely different ways, at completely different cost points, with completely different payloads, et cetera, and completely different operational requirements. So it's really getting down to that nitty-gritty about what it is that you're really looking for. And the more nitty-gritty we can get in that first phase, the easier the search becomes, right? You define exactly what it is. Like, you can even define the color of the airplane, right? And say, I want it to be a blue one because those are the company color, or that's the company color of my business, or whatever the case might be. But what it does is it defines now exactly what it is you're looking for, right? So that when we're looking in the marketplace for that airplane, then we can say, okay, well, it meets 90% or it meets 60% of your requirements. This one meets 95% of your requirements. Suddenly it becomes an attractive one to pursue a little bit further.
We all have to kind of spend our time just having a look, see what's available, look at all the various websites and all the sort of different listings. Are there aircraft that are for sale that don't make it that far?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we think probably about 40 to 50% of the market is transacted off market, right? So they never even make it to the front pages. That's true definitely when you're looking in sort of the top end of owner-flown aircraft and into the turbine market, right? Most of those airplanes, are really good ones, never actually see the likes of the listing ads.
How do you find them?
Well, you'd use a broker or you'd use somebody in the industry, right? Many of them are transacted also just because it's your hangar neighbor who's selling the airplane, right? And so it might be an airplane you know, or maybe an airplane you've flown in the right seat or in the back seat, gone on a trip with the owner, and suddenly they're looking to sell.
How long does it take from the process begins, you know, when you start looking for an aircraft to when you actually start the engine and fly off?
Yeah, it really depends on what type of airplane you're looking for. In this market, the more desirable manufacturers like Cirruses, the TBMs, the Pilatuses, they're moving a little bit faster maybe than something that's a bit more niche, right? And if you're looking for a warbird, or you're looking for an RV, or you're looking for something that's very specific, that might be hard to find exactly the one or that aircraft that fits your mission profile. So if there's a lot of them, then typically they're moving a little bit more consistently.
So going back over your experience, what do you think is the kind of quickest flash to bang, as they say, from someone picking up the phone and going, Philippe, I need a XYZ, to you going, here you go, here's the keys?
Yeah, well, it happens every December, and the last week of December. There's always a flood of buyers that are needing them principally for tax purposes, and mostly in the US. And so they're trying to find an asset and bring it on. And sometimes we'll take an offer, on the first phone call, and we'll be transacting it the morning of the next day, or even sometimes the same day if we can work it fast enough.
Wow, so that's not Father Christmas and reindeer.
Santa Claus, I'm sure, comes into play, right? Buying an airplane is never a rational decision, so we need a little bit of Christmas magic to make it all happen.
Talking of that, and I clearly believe that it is a rational decision because I've bought an airplane. I've known a few people over the years who've kind of bought an aircraft and then realised that it probably wasn't the right aircraft for them. Is that back to that first point about kind of making sure that you know exactly what you want?
Yeah, definitely, right? And it's not just knowing what we want today, but it's how we might, or you want somebody to challenge you in that conversation about what your mission might become,
yeah.
Right? And so if you're a young family but they're going to grow up, right? And maybe a payload that's for 4 people with 2 young kids works today, but does it work for you in 3 years or 4 years when they're, approaching 10 years old? And then how long do you intend to own that airplane, right? And what do you see in your own personal situation, your own financial situation? What do you see about your progress, if it's forecastable or not, so that you can either buy the airplane now that fits you for 10 years, or you buy one that fits for 3 and you upgrade to the next one or the next one, whatever that cycle might be. But really getting that and understanding that timeline, that budget, that need today, then it avoids the regret that happens 6 months later when you think, oh man, this one doesn't really do that thing that I wanted it to do.
So talking of money, I'm sure there are some pilots out there who decide the aircraft they want, put their hands in their pockets, pull out their credit cards or checkbook, if anyone's got a checkbook anymore, and just pay for it in effectively cash. But I'm sure there are also many who will finance that. Do people tend to use special aviation finance, or do they do it through their banks or mortgages, or what?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a spread. So there is asset-backed finance in most countries in Europe and definitely in the U.S. In most countries there's asset-backed finance for aircraft. Generally, it's a little bit more expensive than if you went to your personal banker and you said, hey, I'd like a personal loan, right? So it very much depends on your own situation. When we're moving up market and we're maybe selling to corporate fleets or whatnot, then they'll have business lines of credit that are typically the most cost-effective way of buying those business tools. But it's a real spread for sure. Yeah, I think the first port of call when looking for finance is to call your personal bank and say, hey, bank manager, what's the chance I can get $1 million, $2 million, $3 million on credit, and then go from there.
I can tell you what my bank manager would say.
Absolutely, I think.
Yes, of course.
I've seen your airplanes
Why
interior.
do you need such a traffic amount? So, when you're buying your first aircraft, it's a little bit of a mystery. You can do as much research as you possibly can, and you clearly should do that research, but there's nothing that replaces actually owning your first aircraft for the first time. What are the things that surprise people that they maybe say 6 months down the line, go, I never realized that, or I never thought about that, or that kind of is different to what I expected?
Yeah, I think oftentimes the purchase is an exciting moment, right? Be it your first or your 10th time. When you pick up the keys and you collect that airplane for the first time, I mean, I have a giddy feeling about it all, and I just love that feeling. The buyer's remorse, I suppose, comes maybe with your first maintenance bill, right? It comes when there's a regulatory change or a regulatory requirement, right? If it's a single engine turbine or a multi-engine turboprop, it might be part NCC requirements, right? That sort of hits you in the face right at the beginning of your tenure. And you think, oh my gosh, I wasn't really factoring that in. And this time commitment and this training commitment might not have been part of my plan, right? Or it might also be a pilot training requirement. So if it's a type rating or if it's a transition training into the aircraft, that maybe you didn't think about that right off the bat. But yeah, that 6-month buyer's remorse, typically it's around the maintenance side, and you think, whoa, that first annual inspection, I wasn't factoring in a 25,000 pound annual inspection. So we want to try to reduce that at the front where we can, yeah.
I think my first annual on the 182 that you may be able to see in the background there, that was a long time ago now. I think I've owned that for probably 20 years. That first annual was, I think, £13,000, and it always happens when it often happens when a new shop gets to see an aeroplane that they don't know,
right? And
they go through it completely. I guess that's reduced if you're buying an aircraft that's 6 months old or still under warranty. Then it's a kind of different situation.
Yeah, exactly. Or an aircraft that is in some sort of an ownership program, right? So a TAP Blue, or there's many of them for all the different engine and airframe manufacturers. Right, but if you're in an ownership program, you're also de-risking that. So how can in the acquisition, how can that transfer over, or whatever credit they have on account there, how can that transfer then to you as the new owner? That's a really important consideration. Yeah, and then where there is no ownership program, so maybe on the 182, you're probably not under an ownership program,
no.
Right? So how does the buyer then de-risk that first annual inspection? Well, it's maybe a little bit more upfront in a pre-buy inspection, potentially. right? Or it's just staying really close to the airplane in their last annual, right? Oftentimes, where timing allows in the transaction, a pre-purchase inspection may turn into an annual, right? Especially if you're in that sort of 9th, 10th, 11th month of the year where an annual is coming anyway. You might just do that pre-buy and make it an annual inspection right then and there. Then you have 12 months of clear, in theory, maintenance-free operating.
I think I would say my own advice, for what it's worth, based on the 182 experience, is that you either need to invest the time, effort and energy in understanding the whole process, understanding the maintenance, understanding the legal structures and everything else, or you can not spend that time, but if you don't spend it, you have to pay someone else to do it, and that be that the maintenance people or the people who are operating or looking at it for you. But one way or another, it pays dividends if you get to know the process and understand your aircraft more, and you can't really easily do that without owning it. But I guess if you buy a brand new aircraft, it's slightly different. But even then, I think after a while, you're going to want to get involved in it.
Yeah, and that's partly an acquisition agent would put together and say, hey, these are the due items, however small, right? But your next annual you can expect it to be X amount, right? Because all of these things are actually due. They're not airworthiness items now. So a seller is just going to say, well, the airplane is sort of sold as is, right? I mean, if the battery 2 needs to be replaced every 24 months and that check is coming up in 2 months, it's now your plane, right? So there's a lot of that in aircraft ownership, right, where things become due. I don't think that should be a barrier, because at the end of the day, there's a bit of a, you're buying the airplane and you're going to have these items due at some point regardless of, right? But I think it's going in with your eyes wide open and saying, yeah, that first annual might be a big one, and just to know it, right? And say, hey, that first annual is going to be a big one because you delayed certain things, maybe to the seller, right? You delayed certain things, and how about you just give me a 5K credit or a 10K credit, on the purchase of the aircraft. And at least then it becomes a discussion, right? And in a market like we have right now, where it's harder to sell airplanes, the market has tightened up quite a bit since immediately after the COVID. And so, there's maybe a little bit more room to negotiate with a seller.
So to sum it up, do your research, be honest with yourself, invest some time in understanding things, and do as much during that whole. I kind of almost think that purchase process is possibly one of the sweetest whole times, because you're looking, you're trying, you're experimenting, you're kind of like trying to figure out. And I don't want to draw too much of a parallel, but owning an airplane is a little bit more of a special relationship than buying a new suitcase. And so you need to kind of get it right.
Yeah, you want to get it right. And the mistakes of getting it wrong can be quite costly, depending on what airplane it is.
Absolutely. Great.
Awesome.
So if anyone needs any more specific help, they should just get in touch and give you a call.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're available 24/7 minus 15 and 2. No, anytime.
Anytime.
Yeah.